Hi everyone, Ron Taylor here again. In this video I'd like to talk a little bit about studying, what students think studying is, what I think studying is, what the problem is surrounding the misconceptions around studying, and how we can fix it and help students become better learners. At the start of the year, when I was in the classroom, right now I'm an assistant principal, but for 19 years I was in the classroom. And I'd start the year off asking lots of questions, building positive relationships, giving students surveys anonymously, asking them questions, trying to learn about them, what makes them tick, what helps them learn, what their thoughts are on education. And I would make changes along the way based on the responses I would get from the students. And that helped build that relationship because they knew that the feedback I received from them, I wasn't just looking at it and moving on from and saying, these kids are students, they don't know what they're talking about. I would use the feedback and make positive change and work with them to better help everyone learn. So anyway, one of the questions I ask at the beginning of the year is, what does studying look like to you? And the vast majority of students will answer that question by talking about what's happening the night before an assessment. So you'll see responses like, well, the night before a big test, I'll go through my notes, I'll try practice problems, I'll open the book and do the odd problems and check the answers in the back to see how I did, or I'll open your Google Classroom, and they go through examples like that, which are all great, or I'll call a friend, whatever it may be. But most, if not all of them, are talking about what's happening the night before, the day of the test. I also ask students how long they hold on to the information that they learn in a unit. And that it's insane, but understandable, or expected, I should say. In that case, they'll share, like, I remember things from a unit maybe 3 days after a test, and that's pretty consistent across the board. The number 3 is the number that came up most often. 3 days is how long I remember things after I take a unit test. So students are cramming, dumping, and forgetting. There's probably a better phrase for that, but anyway, that's what I'm going with. Cram, regurgitate, dump. And there's a brain psychologist, I'm forgetting his name, but he says something like cramming can be so severe that not only will students forget what they learned moments or days after they take an assessment, but they'll forget that they ever learned it at all. Like, so if somebody says, hey, you learned about polynomials last year, do you remember these specific things? It won't even trigger in their brain that they, oh yeah, I remember that now. I didn't a minute ago, but once you brought it up to my attention, I remember it. They just flat out have no recollection of it. That's how bad cramming can be these days. So anyway, studying is not cramming, and we need to get that across to our students. And so I share a couple of stories with my students at the beginning of the year. Here they are. I'll try to condense them. I play it up for them a little bit, but they're true stories from my college experiences. And one of them is from my Calculus 2 class when I was in college. My professor, very nice guy. The grades in the class came from the mid-semester assessment test and the end of semester test. And that was it. He gave us homework, but we were just expected to do it or not do it. It was up to us. He was giving us that freedom. And so a lot of times, I'm going to take this video in several directions. I know I was specifically saying I was going to talk about studying, but I'm going to divert here for a second. A lot of times we tell students, like, we're doing these things in high school because we want to prepare you for college. And one of the things we do a lot in high school is we count homework towards a grade. And maybe in some college classes that happens, but it's certainly not across the board. And in some college classes, students need to have, they need to build a sense of responsibility and accountability. They need to own their learning. They need to learn how to self-assess. If they don't have those skills, they're going to flounder in college. So why not help them do that in high school? Why not give them homework, provide them with the resources to do the homework, check their answers, retry them, come see you if they need to, that sort of thing. So anyway, I'll dig into that deeper later. So this professor gave us homework and whatnot, and I would pay attention in class, and I'd raise my hand and volunteer answers, and I wasn't always right. And that was okay. I was comfortable with being wrong. And I know there's a lot of people that don't feel comfortable being wrong, but I was like, I'm in this class. I'm going to throw my hand in the air and give it a try. Or even if it was a complex problem, I'd be like, I think I can get us started. And the teacher would say, great, like no one else is raising their hand. Like, please, yeah, go ahead, get us started. And so I remember something similar to that happened one day after he gave a homework assignment. He said, I know one of the tougher problems on the homework was question 17. And he was like, who would like to walk us through that problem? And no one raised their hand, and I did my classic, like slowly hand go up, halfway up into the air type of thing. And he says, Ron? And I said, I can at least get us started. And I remember the half smile on his face. Like, he was just proud that I was getting us going. So I started us off. I said, I got here, wasn't quite sure where to go. Some other people at this point were listening to what I said. He was writing on the board, and they were able to take it further, and I paid attention, and we got there as a class. So I would do things like that. Like, I was invested in my learning. I tried. I did the homework even though it wasn't worth points. And I know that's not the case with everyone. I know sometimes students won't do the homework unless there's no points, and we'll talk about that either later in this video or in another video. But anyway, that's how I conducted myself throughout this entire semester. Paid attention in class. I wasn't hyper-focused, but I was paying attention, participating as needed, taking notes, and then trying the homework that he gave. He wasn't giving us busy work. He was giving us problems that he specifically thought would help us in our learning. So I went home and I tried them. Or I went to my dorm and I tried them. And then I'd make sure I understood them the next time we had class. And if I didn't, or if he explained it, I'd go and I'd try it again. Anyway, I remember the night before the test, the final exam of the class. The night before this final exam, I went out to eat with some friends at a restaurant. It was one of my friend's birthdays, so we went out. I didn't think at all about the test that I had the next day that was worth 50% of my college grade in calculus too. We came home after the test. We hung out. We might have played Mario Kart for like an hour, and then I went to bed. I had no nightmares. I set my alarm. I woke up in the morning. I grabbed a pencil, maybe two, can't remember, and I walked to class. And I remember walking across campus towards the building, and there was a student in my class who I saw on the way there, and they had their notebook out, and they were frantically turning the pages looking for something and then looking at it. And when I kind of caught up to them, because they were walking slowly, trying to learn on their way to class in that moment, they said, oh my gosh, do you remember how to do this? And it was like, I kind of chuckled, but I could see the urgency, like a massive sense of urgency in this student who I knew from the class. And I said, yeah, I'll kind of talk you through it as we walk to class. And then when I went to class and I walked in and I sat down, same thing. Students ripping through their notes, trying practice problems, asking each other, like, I tried this problem for a long time last night. I couldn't figure it out. Can you help me? And I remember just sitting at the desk with a pencil. And this story's going on a little bit longer than I had wanted to. I just sat there kind of with a pencil in my hand, and the girl sitting next to me said, oh my gosh, Ron, how long did you study last night that you're not even reviewing anything right now? And I said, I didn't. I went out to dinner with my roommate. It was his birthday. Because I didn't have to study that night. I didn't go into this detail with her, but I took the test. I don't remember what grade I got on it. I know I got an A in the course, but I had prepared as a learner. I was a learner. I didn't have to worry about studying because I was learning as the days progressed. Sure, there were days where I left class and I didn't do the homework right away. I might have gone and played catch with a friend in the quad, or whatever it might have been. There were days where I just did whatever I wanted for me, but there were also days where I made sure I put aside some time to practice math, and I made sure that I understood it. And then when it came time to take the test, I had been doing these little studying sessions in chunks, half hours at a time, and I dominated that test, and there were no nightmares before it. I wasn't crammed studying. I didn't think about the test at all, and I did really well. Now, on the flip side, I've had classes in college where the complete opposite has happened, where quite frankly, there are other systems in place like attendance was a grade. Like you had to swipe your ID every time you went to class, and that was 10% of your grade. And then there were projects as well, and you could you'd collaborate with your friends and be like, hey, you did this project last semester, can you give me some pointers on it? And you'd collect these free points, and you knew going into the final exam, that you didn't need to do stellar to get a B or a C in the class. But I remember there was one specific class where I kind of didn't take it seriously, and I showed up to class, but I didn't pay attention, but I was collecting those points for having shown up. I was turning in projects, but not really. I had no idea what I was putting on, paper. I was just kind of listening to my friend talk about what they did in the past, and I wrote it down and did it. But this final exam was worth, 60% of our grade or something like that. And I remember I didn't dig in until the night before, and I was like, I can read 8 chapters in the textbook. I didn't take very good notes, so I had to call somebody on campus who I didn't even really know, who was in my class, and say, hey, can I borrow your notes? And then I didn't really understand their notes because they weren't my notes and it wasn't my note style. And so anyway, I panicked, and after about 3 hours, I recognized the fact that I had no idea what I was doing, and I couldn't just teach it to myself. And that feeling of panic was awful. And I remember I tried to go to sleep, and I set my alarm to wake up early because I was tired. I was like, I'll just wake up at 4 in the morning. I'll go to sleep at 1, wake up at 4, and I'll start studying again. But when I went to sleep, it was terrible sleep. Having nightmares that that I slept through the alarm and I missed the class and that sort of thing. And anyway, the bummer is I don't remember what happened. And when I tell this to my classes, they're bummed too, because you want to hear the end of that story. I don't know how it ended. I know I passed the class, but it was just a terrible, terrible feeling. So my point is, studying doesn't happen the night before. This isn't about cramming, this is about learning. And a lot of times I hear teachers say things like, these kids just don't know how to study. And a lot of times the blame is put on the teachers from, the middle school, or the teacher who had them last year, or, things are too easy for them in the past, where they didn't need to study. But a lot of times I'll hear those teachers say this, and I'm talking from past experiences. I have 19 years of experience in the classroom and talking with teachers. There's no working with students in the moment to help them become studiers. So we have to teach them to self-assess. We have to give them those resources and turn the assessments into low stakes, high feedback opportunities where students don't care if they make a mistake, because they're going to be able to recover from it. It can't be a stressful situation where they think everything they do has to be right at all times. And so in my last video, I know I talked about this, I gave short assessments with like 2 or 3 standards on each one. And students did not know which standards were going to be on the assessment. It just, any standard that we learned in the course could be on it, and they would get a grade per standard. And these assessments were twice a cycle. I think we had 7-day cycles. And kids would come in, they knew when to expect them, but they didn't know what standards would be on it. And I just collected evidence of learning over time. And so if they took standard 3, I'll call it, multiple times throughout the first term, I would stack those grades in line from left to right. And I would see how they were tracking over time. And I remember one day a young lady said to me, like, Mr. Taylor, can you come here? And I walked over, and she had the first 3 assessments out from a particular standard. And she said, I've gotten a C on all 3 of these. And I kind of smiled, because I was like, yes, I'm consistent in my grading and my feedback. She said, I'm making the same mistake on these nonstop. And like, I don't want to make that mistake anymore. I want to grow my learning and do better the next time we have this standard. So yeah, she made mistakes. She had not studied. She hadn't accepted my feedback and tried to learn from it. She was just making the same mistakes over and over and over again. Well, after 3 consecutive C's, she said, I don't want C's on this anymore. And she couldn't just ignore it. A lot of times in classes, right, like a student can get a C on one assessment, but then they can just bury it with like a bunch of other A's on other assessments. Well, what happens to that C? They never actually gain the knowledge in that area. So we're just ignoring the fact that they have a learning gap of 25% on that particular topic, standard, unit, whatever it is, and we're just burying it with these other grades in other areas. Why not put in a system where students want to go back and learn the most important key concepts in your class? And when I say assessing on standards, I don't mean every standard in the class. We're talking like power standards, priority standards. Maybe there's 15 to 20 that you have to teach in a year that are necessary for students to carry forward with them. And so anyway, it was beautiful. We went over together in the class how to do it. I gave my students lots of times to have these moments where, hey, today is for you. We're not going to do a whole class study session. Today is for you, where you, in particular, can track your progress across your standards. You know what you need to work on because you can track your progress. The standards that you already know how to do, don't work on those. If you've been stringing together A's on standard 4 all term, don't put into time studying term standard 4. Research and studies state that students oftentimes think they're going to dominate a test because of the way they study. A lot of times when they study the stuff they know, right? So if there's like 10 things on a review sheet that the teacher gives them and they know how to do 6 of them, they'll start with those 6 and they'll be like, and they'll be working on them. And then those last 4, they put in the least amount of time. They're tired. They have other things they need to do. And then they go to class, and what they remember in their head is, I felt really comfortable practicing for this assessment. Well, sure they did. They were practicing the stuff they knew already. That is not studying. Studying is knowing what you know and what you don't. I think that's called feedback-driven metacognition. I heard that on a podcast with Jennifer Gonzalez, The Cult of Pedagogy, where she had a couple of people on talking about retaining strategies, that sort of thing. And one of them was feedback-driven metacognition, giving students the ability to know what they know and what they don't, allowing students to self-assess. So if you give students a tracker sheet, that sort of thing, I hate this on-ramp. I'm good. All right. If you give students a tracker sheet, they're able to track their own progress and practice in their areas of need. Then when they go home, they don't have homework in every single night for your class, this blanket assessment that every student needs to work on. They go home and they work on what they need to work on, because what they need to do at home is different than someone else. And if they have full understanding of all the standards we've taught so far, great. Don't worry about practicing anything right now. So that young lady worked with me, practiced more, and then strung together multiple A's in that standard. I think at the end of term 1, she had CCCA is how she finished the term. I had assessed on it 4 times, and it's like, I didn't give her the A for that standard for the term because she hadn't shown me enough consistency around it. I'm not in the business of ignoring everything that happened, but I am looking for the most, consistency around the end, the most recent evidence of learning. And so she got a B. Well, she didn't like that. Well, guess what? She made sure that she reviewed it again, and she received A's the next couple of times that she took this standard assessment. And again, she didn't know when it was coming. So if you're able to get an A on an assessment and you didn't know that was the assessment I was going to be giving you, that to me means that's a clear indicator that actually, yeah, you've got it. You know how to work on that standard. It's not something that you crammed the night before, regurgitated, and then demonstrated that you understood it for a day for me. So a couple more things. I see I'm almost at 20 minutes on this video, and I like to keep them between 20 and 25, so we'll see how we can do here. I had a young lady come into my class once on the day of an assessment, and she said, Mr. Taylor, oh my God, you're going to be so proud of me. Last night I studied for this test for 4 hours. Ready to high-five me. And I was like, what? That is not okay. I'm like, what went wrong? And she's like, what went wrong? I thought you'd be proud of me. Like, isn't that awesome? Like, I wanted to do well. I studied for 4 hours. And I'm like, things have been going wrong. This is 8-10 years ago, before I started this system of assessing that I'm now doing, or was doing recently. I said, something's gone massively wrong if you think you need to study for that long. That sounds like you were learning an entire unit rather than just tidying up a few loose ends and getting a good night's sleep. Like, that is not what I want at all. Or think about the amount of times you're giving an assessment and a student comes in and they're like, oh my God, I have 1 or 2 quick questions before we take the test. Can I just ask you these questions before you give me the test? In the past, I'd soak up their anxiety and be like, sure, yeah, let me help you. And I'd turn and I'd frantically start writing on the board, trying to help them learn minutes before taking the assessment. So there'd be times where that would happen, and then the student would sit down and I'd pass out the assessment, and they'd turn it over to the back where it was a blank sheet, and they'd write down exactly what I just told them. And then when they'd see a problem on the assessment that was similar to the one that they didn't know how to do, that I just taught them moments earlier, they'd use it as a guide to help walk them through that problem. And then they'd get their A or their B, and then they'd forget it, and everything was hunky-dory. Their parents were happy with the A. I was happy with their A. They were happy with their A. And then it dawned on me, that's not learning. She's not studying. That's an additional form of cramming. Like, that's crazy. So sometimes students would say, can we just have 5 minutes as a class to review a couple of problems? You're not ready. You didn't study. So this new way of assessing helped students learn to self-assess and to take ownership of their learning. If you don't like earning certain grades on a particular standard, power standard, priority standard, the standards that are most important in this course, they're going to take the time to talk to you, to practice, to make sure that they're ready for it next time. If we don't average grades, they're not going to buy in if you're averaging their previous struggles with their current awesomeness. That's gonna tick them off, and they'll find ways to just do mediocre and get their B and move on. So I really like the idea of having lots of assessments. I talk about evidence over time, tracking evidence over time, getting away from averaging and using our professional judgment. I'll talk about this again in some other video, but one time I gave a pop final exam to a class on the 16 most important topics in our curriculum. And I remember I gave it to the kids, and there was like, I said, this isn't worth anything. I'm not going to grade it and put it in the grade book. It's just for you to see what you know and what you don't prior to going into the final exam. I'll definitely talk about this more in another video because I really like the story behind it. And students started like laughing. Once they knew like it was okay that they didn't know it wasn't going in the grade book, kids were like, I don't even remember learning this. And they were looking at each other and they were like, I know, like there was comfort in the fact that most people had no idea, no recollection of the stuff they learned in term 1. And in this math class, I'm like, you're going into, next year's math class, you've got to hold on to this stuff because you're going to need it. You can't just tell kids that. You have to change your own system to help them become learners. An A doesn't mean that they're a good learner or a true learner. You have to build a system to help them. And I hope that they go to college and they break things up into chunks and they learn the right way. So anyway, there's pop assessment. I think out of the 16 questions, I was grading it right or wrong because it was just to let them know, to give them a general understanding of how they were doing, and it wasn't going in the grade book. The average was 3 out of 16 that kids were getting right, which was atrocious. But lots of kids were getting A's in my classes, but on the final exams, they were getting like C's, D's, F's, and the final exam was worth 10%. And I'm like, what's going on here where kids are getting A's every term in my class, but getting C's, D's, and F's on the final exam? Do they not know how to study? Or is it that they don't know how to learn? We have to teach them to become learners. And that's what I've entrenched myself in over the years. So anyway, I told this story to a class about the pop final exam. And my class started, we got up and went to lunch, and we had to come back from lunch and continue the class. And I heard this young man say to a young lady who's sitting at his table, he said, no one's stopping for these people to cross the crosswalk. I'm going to try to be a nice guy here. So he came back from class and he said, I don't know why people get nervous about Mr. Taylor's system for grading, where he doesn't tell us what's going to be on the assessment. We just have to be ready for it. He was like, I've never felt this way before. He said, but if he were to randomly put a midterm down on my desk or all of our desks right now today, he said I would be ready for it. How good is that? I asked him, I'm pretty sure I tweeted this. It was several years ago. I said, can you give me permission to tweet that? Because that just made my absolute day. And he said in years past he would do well in classes, but he wasn't retaining it because he was doing the old, I'll sit here in your class, take notes, you tell me what you want me to know, I'll write it down, I'll memorize the process, and when you give me similar problems, I'll make sure I know I've memorized the steps that I need to do to be able to do it. And he dominated math classes. Well, then he would study for hours and hours prior to a final exam or a midterm exam. In my class, where I had these small chunked assessments, where again, it's stressful at first for students because they don't know what's going to be on them, but that teaches them to self-assess. If they want to be prepared and ready for any assessment that I put down in front of them on a particular day, what do they need to do? They need to study. Where should they spend their time studying? The stuff they don't know. So if we've covered 5 major topics, power standards, and you know 3 or 4 of them really well, and one of our assessments is coming up, guess what they're going to do? They've tracked their progress. They know what they know what they don't know through feedback-driven metacognition, and they're going to practice in their areas of need. We have videos posted for them on how to work through problems. There's YouTube, there's Khan Academy. Like, I was a math teacher. They could come in for extra help, and they can close their learning gaps and do well. It took time, but students got there. And it was okay that it took some students longer than others to get to that point, because I didn't average term grades at the end of the year either. Like term 1, if you earned a C, term 2, I didn't take the 4 terms and average those together to determine your transcript grade. And I talked about this in my last video. We were constantly going back and doing cumulative assessments where I'd revisit things from term 1, 2, 3, throughout the year. In term 4, we'd be revisiting things from term 1. And so at the end of every single term, I was looking at all the standards that we had taught up until that point. I tracked from left to right how they were progressing their learning, and then I gave them a grade based on their level of understanding at that time, looking for consistency and putting weight on the most recent work. And it was tremendous. What was fantastic was giving the POP final exam. Oh, I'm going to wait until that story in the next video, that POP final exam. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. But I'm already closing in on a half hour in this video here, and I bought a coffee and I haven't even taken a sip yet. So thanks for joining me. If you have questions, drop them below. This is my second YouTube video. I'm ready for comments, questions. What do you got? Let's start a dialogue. I'm really enjoying this. I hope those of you that are watching enjoy it as well. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.